Welcome to the Spiritual Healing Cloud podcast. We help you explore an alternative world of insight, healing, and growth. Welcome again to Spiritual Healing Cloud. This is about the 6th or 7th episode, and I'm going to try and do something a little bit differently today. Rather than having a clear structure to everything, this is a chat, and I'm very privileged that the person who's come on today is somebody I've known for a very long time, and he's got a lot to contribute and share about male mental health especially. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Joey Kolirin. Hey Joey, welcome aboard.
Hi, thank you very much for having me, and well handled on my surname.
As I said, I needed to practice that just before, and I didn't want to leave it too long before it left my mind. I'll let you introduce yourself, but let me first share with the listeners today how I first met you, because it was many years back, I guess about 20 years, 15 years, something like that. And you had come to travel in Thailand with my cousin and one other friend. I think was that Paul?
Paul, yeah.
Shout out to Paul. And I remember you guys were in your 20s at the time. I think you were pretty fresh when it came to traveling, and we hosted you. And the one thing which I really remember from you at the time was you seemed to be incredibly health conscious, very focused on health, to the point that we were traveling all around Bangkok, making sure that we could help you find the foods which you could eat. And when you sent me your bio, one of the things which really stood out at me, and I'll quote it, Joey spent much of his 20s determined to end his life. And I think this was really significant because I had no idea. So I will ask you a little bit about that in a moment, but let's just backtrack. Would you like to just introduce a very quick bio? I know you've gone through a lot of troubling times in your life. Perhaps you could share that first.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, we did meet a long time ago in very different circumstances. But yeah, I'm 40. I turned 40 a couple of months ago, and it's interesting how I look at my life, because the first 20 years is where it all happened, and we can get into parts of that or not. And then the 20 years following that is basically dealing with it. So yeah, between my 20s and my 30s, it was very much clinical and therapy based. So very much, doctors, hospitals, medication, looking into what went wrong. And the last 10 years have been more in the stage of sort of coaching and, changing behaviors, to put it right. But yeah, lots of diagnoses which we'll get on, and lots of things which are, still affect me every single day. Just about managing it.
Joey Kolirin speaks at schools, charities, corporations, and community organizations to share how he overcame mental health problems, diagnosed with depression, anxiety, addiction, and borderline personality disorder. Joey spent much of his 20s determined to end his life. So this is the past. This is what you've been going through. Are you in the clear now? Are you waking up every day feeling amazing, the sun's shining, hearing the birds tweeting?
No.
No.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And it's funny because even, our opening gambit, we're both smiling and we're both laughing, but, what brought us here is the polar opposite, his experience, his tears, challenges. So, yeah, I'm not sure how good a podcast would be if we sat here crying and consoling each other, but it is an interesting, I was just looking at myself on screen thinking, I wonder what people are thinking, they're thinking he looks like a happy-go-lucky guy, and part of me's like, my God, if only you knew. So yeah, definitely not in the all clear.
I have this, perhaps it's a very unhealthy belief, but often when I see people who are making too much of an effort to be happy, I always wonder what's going on under the surface with that. So it's good that you address that, but it's also amazing. I mean, something which I really admire about you is you're owning this, you're recognizing this. And not only have you been taking steps, you said since your 20s to 30s, you've been going through the therapy, you've been going to the doctors, and you're at a stage that whilst you're still going through it, you're still able to contribute. You're able to help other people as a speaker, as a role model, setting an example about telling people, hey, I haven't just had a magic pill and everything's gone away. Because I think that is what people want to hear, and it's what people would love to get from therapy. I have a lot of clients, and they come to me. I do spiritual hypnosis, and unfortunately, I never have a client who comes to me with a problem and we deal with that problem, and then their life is absolutely perfect for the rest of their life. There's always something, and there always will be something. And I think something I really credit with you is you seem to have recognized it early, and you have done enough about it that where you are today, and I'm sure this will also come up, but I know you now as a very successful. Are you a director of the company you're working with now? You're married, you have children, and on the surface, I believe that's what a lot of people consider as a sign of success.
Yeah, look, you touched on a lot of interesting topics. The first thing to note, and this is 100% genuine, is you've paid me a couple of, well, not compliment, like comments about a level of respect you hold. As soon as you're saying it, inside me, there's like a wall of resistance, and it's like I want to be very quick to let the audience know that none of that's true and it's a load of shit, And it's not that, for those watching or listening, it's not that what Martin's saying is not true in his eyes. And I'm just sort of recognizing, and I guess, part of the work I do is really focused on the fact that things aren't what they seem. And, even if you see someone who's literally top of their game, Oscar Pistorius, gold medalist, look,
Of
look,
course.
look what, something he was going through and what happened to him. And, there's lots of people in the public spotlight. But yeah, first thing I just wanted to, before my ADHD sidetracks into something else, is as soon as Martin said that, it's like, oh God, no, don't lead them down a path thinking that I'm actually good, because I'm not.
Right.
So yeah, that was the first thing.
Can we jump back to when we first met then? As I
Sure.
said, my first impression was, wow, this guy is so obsessed with being healthy. What was going on there?
Well, although there's a bit of mess, I'm sat in my home gym in the bottom of my garden. So health and fitness has been a very, very big part of my life for a very long time. When I came traveling, actually, when I was with you, my dad was on his last legs. He's very, very unwell, and it was a really horrible time for me. There were lots of discussions about, my family didn't want me to go. My dad, actually, to his credit, said, "What difference does it make, if I die and you're here, or I'm not, get on with your life." And that was one of the signs of what, sort of man he was. But underneath that was, I was watching someone pass away, and I watched someone pass away for a long time. He got diagnosed when I was 9. He died when I was 23. And I couldn't help but attribute some of his illness to lifestyle choices, and again, for those that have seen someone go from, this really to wearing a nappy, being a bag of bones, it has a very profound effect on you. So I think for me, never, and I almost say this like it's a justification, like, well done you, but I personally have never turned to drugs or alcohol as a coping mechanism. I turned to the gym, and I used to have this thought process, which I came to learn was very unhealthy, but at the time I didn't think so, that the more I train, or, if I'm on a treadmill and I'm running, I've got my dad's life support machine. And if I stop, he's going to pass away. So just to summarize this, what that was about, uh, either side of going traveling, I was actually in and out of the Priory Hospital.
Oh,
And I remember going in, this is before I went traveling, and I spent a lot of time talking about my dad, and the pain, and that's quite obvious. So if someone tells you what I've just told you, it's quite obvious to relate to it, of, yeah, that sounds sad. But when I was in the Priory, they weren't actually interested in any of the trauma or the grief. They were interested in my eating habits. And I remember it so clearly. I would sit there and I wanted to explore what it was like watching someone die, and this, that, and the other. They weren't interested. They every day would set me a task to eat a pizza, and I was like, "What's this got to do with, I'm in despair here. My dad's dying." And anyway, I learned to realize that it was an addiction. And the reason I mentioned my gym in my house here is, when I built it, there was half my family were like, "Great, is one of your dreams? How lucky am I? I've got a gym in the bottom of my garden." The other half who knew me properly were actually fearful that I'd end up spending all my time in here. So yeah, just a very long answer. Sorry about that, but it's all to do with my connection to death, basically, and that's really what drove it.
Right, now I understand that. One thing I do find quite fascinating about addiction is I feel that there's perhaps three aspects of addiction. There's the blatantly unhealthy addiction, cigarettes, alcohol, sex, whatever that might be. And there's positive addictions. And I guess there's a balance as well. I remember I was dating somebody once and she was an addict. She had an addictive personality to things. And I remember going to her house for the first time and being amazed and being impressed with it because she had post-it notes all over her house and they're all positive. They were, have a great day, you're wonderful, and all of this. And it should have been a red flag in some ways because it's still an addiction. And when it was in control, it was very positive, and when it got out of control, it it absolutely went the other way. And have you been able to control that addiction now in any respect? I don't mean to, you know, to cast a shadow on the fact that you're exercising. I think it's a very healthy thing to be doing. Do you over
Um,
exercise?
you've asked some good questions there. Really, really good topics, honestly. Look, what I've learned through sitting in hospitals, and I've spent a lot of time in places where superficial chats and talking doesn't really go on. We've been behind the facade, whether people have wanted to or not. And you come to realize everyone's got a different perception of life. Again, you and I have studied NLP. We know that there's different filters, going on. The obviously VACOD, and there's visual effect. There's all things going on. So when I'm speaking, you'll interpret it one way, and the listeners in another way, and I'm interpreting what you're saying, and vice versa. So I guess the first thing is it's open to interpretation, and that is what's so difficult with the non or inoffensive. Gambling's obviously not good. Taking drugs is obviously not good. Food, yeah, it's a difficult one because you have to eat every day, and same with exercise. I think where it becomes a problem is really twofold for me. One, when it's compulsive. So when I want to elect not to or to stop, and I don't feel I can, then I've lost control of the situation and I'm living for an addiction. So regardless of what the addiction could be to making money. Some people are workaholics and they say, well, I give lots to charity. They might do, but what's the sacrifice? And are you able to stop? I guess the first thing. But the second thing for me is a bigger thing. It's the mental connection to it. So it's okay not to train, but when I don't train, the abuse I get in my head is even louder than when I do train. And notice I didn't say it's gone or when I train yet, because it's not gone. It's louder when I don't train.
Right.
So yeah, so is that healthy? I don't know, but it's an interesting topic because I always used to argue in hospital. What don't be so stupid. And they told me I was in denial. I was, I'm going to the gym every day. I'm lean. I'm in good shape. Yes, I think hopefully I've given a bit of an insight into that.
I think it's the most horrible attack somebody can make on somebody to say you're in denial because how do you argue with that?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
if they're
exactly,
not?
exactly.
It's like,
It's self-fulfilling, isn't it?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree
You
with
can
you.
only agree to disprove the point.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, that was everything you're saying is. I'm holding my tongue. It's like, I've got the next question lined up already because of what you've been talking about there. What I was really interested in is it seems to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but whilst there is a chance you may exercise and train too much, it's a healthier way of getting through life than not doing it at the moment. It is one of your coping mechanisms.
It's honestly it's an impossible question to answer, an impossible statement. Again, without, I don't mean to sort of repeat and go over it. Firstly, it depends who's looking at it and what the mechanism is. For me, for example, I'm in such a habit of getting up at 5 a.m. and I'm normally in here at, quarter past, 20 past in the morning.
Right.
Now, that the caveat to that, loads of people say, oh, you must go to bed really early, and I don't. So I tend to get between 5 and 5.5 hours sleep a night. Um, so yeah, it's difficult. Look, scientifically, that's not enough sleep, and people would say, your body's not allowed to heal. I also know, as I said, the opportunity cost. If I don't go to the gym, the self-hatred for how I look and how I am is very, very large. I'll tell you what I liken it to, which I've been talking about a lot recently, and it's quite topical: the Ozempic injections.
Oh, yes.
Now, people have asked me, just not because I'm a scientist or anything like that, but do you think I should take them? Do you think they're good for you, or do you think they're going to have side effects? Now, in my opinion, anything that's not nature is not good for you, particularly something that is altering what the body is meant to do. So I'm never going to answer that in solidarity. Taking injections of that nature, of that kind, are good for you. However, my argument, it's the same as having surgery. It's risk versus reward. Now, if you have such low self-esteem with your weight, for example, that you don't want to go out, that it's disrupting your life, that you don't want to eat, and if there's so much pain caused by the way that you look, and you don't feel that other more healthy methods can help you to reduce weight, then in my opinion, just my personal opinion, it's okay to take something that's going to reduce your weight because the benefit outweighs the drawback, but that still
Understood.
doesn't make it healthy.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. So we were talking about exercising being, again, forgive me if I'm paraphrasing, but a coping mechanism. I don't want to be
Yeah.
putting words in your mouth. And I remember something which really fascinated me was the last time we spoke, you also mentioned that NLP, neuro linguistic programming, has really helped you. Now, it did surprise me. I'm an NLP master practitioner myself. We're both NLP coaches. And I always dismissed a lot of NLP as, oh, it's only a sticky plaster. And you've really helped me to reevaluate that. And I was thinking, well, even if it is a sticky plaster, if we provide ourselves with enough sticky plasters to get through our day, our week, our life, then so be it if there is no ultimate cure for things. How do you use NLP to get through things? How does it work?
Um, for me, NLP, the basis of it is rapport. I think it's a key word of NLP. But for me, ahead of rapport is understanding the connection between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. For me personally, that's what I take from it. Now, I've heard lots of people say it's manipulating and it's this and it's that. And, NLP is one of those phrases when you get someone that's read a 5-page intro to it, they're almost either experts or fearful of it. For me, it's understanding, and it goes back to something you said, I think, before we started recording, which was about, basically, is this nature or nurture, which might be a question for down the line. I want to understand what causes me to behave in the way I behave, or think the way I think, or feel the way I feel. Now, if I can understand that, I'm slightly further ahead in changing it. And it's the same with other people. So, unfortunately, I can be very, what's the word, sympathetic, or spare an extra thought for people who have committed terrible atrocities. Not because I agree or share the same moral compass, but I've spent so much time understanding people that I know things can happen. And I know that, lots of murderers, for example, and I know topical subject which you might know more about than I do, for various reasons, or you might want to cut that out. I don't
No, no,
know.
no, absolutely. You're right. That
Um,
was one of the ways I survived in prison. I
yeah.
was literally surrounded by murderers and rapists and really significant drug dealers, and I became a listener, which is a Samaritan basically in the prison. And the one thing I really learned was everybody there was a product of circumstance. And I don't know if that's a very popular thing to be sharing with people. I think there'll be a lot of people who know some people are just born evil, but often hearing people's backstories, it's like could they have gone any other way in life? I really doubt it with the conditions they were brought up in. So
So
I
that
think it's important to recognize that.
that's the thing. I don't know if I believe in evil. Mother Teresa had bad sides, and I'm sure there were some people that Hitler was good to. I it's the same as purposeful practice. With footballers and sports people, not all of them are just gifted. You've got purposeful practice is 10,000 hours of practicing in a certain way. So not just playing table tennis, but putting a 10p piece on the corner of the table and hitting that around for hours. That's the big difference between practice and purposeful. So I read a book called Bounce, which was by a former Paralympic table tennis champion,
Right.
and he dispelled all theories about genetics. It's a phenomenal book, but again, in the guise of NLP and what you're saying is, lots of murderers have made one bad decision at the worst time. A lot of them, not everyone is, bona fide serial killer that is so warped they've just been put on this planet to kill. Not everyone.
Well, that's the NLP concept, isn't it? We all make the best decisions with the information we have available.
Exactly. And so back to me, look, it's not to excuse it. That's the thing, someone in that scenario has lost their life, and it's against the law, it's inhumane, it ruins people's lives, it. But all I'm trying to say is it also ruins the life of the person who's done it. And sometimes there's, like you said, there's an impaired decision making process. So it's not necessarily that they're just a piece of shit. And did they come out of their mother's womb as a piece of shit? I do think they were predisposed to being a piece of shit, through genetics and through upbringing. But yeah, I mean, it's an age old debate, a fascinating one. But
Well,
yeah,
let
yeah,
yeah. Well,
sorry.
let's turn this debate around back to you because this was something I just talked to you about before. So you've got quite a CV of mental health disorders. I don't know if there's a polite way of phrasing it
Unfortunately,
like that. Sorry,
yeah,
I shall not be giving a eulogy for you.
okay,
But
yeah.
yeah, again, just to reiterate, diagnosed with depression, anxiety, addiction, borderline personality, and you spent your 20s determined to end your life. Now, how much of this do you believe? And again, I recognize you're not a qualified therapist, but you're obviously somebody with real life experience with this. How much of these diagnostics do you believe were caused from birth? Were just something you were born with, and how much of that do you believe was a product of your upbringing?
So I'm going to have to say 50-50 because it's
Mm.
something that I debate, honestly, on a daily basis inside, my head. There are things that I remember, for example, when my anger goes, the red mist I experienced, honestly, has been there for as long as I can remember. I remember my mum telling me when I was a kid, I would go off into moods. I mean, literally be fine 1 minute and not fine the next. And she distinctly tells me, and she still tells me to this day, about the times where I was stood on the stairs crying my eyes out. I'd had a temper tantrum. I'd continue crying after, and I'd say I just can't stop it. Now, I believe that is nothing other than nature. Watching my dad was a very, very aggressive, angry man, and it was honestly like watching a gas canister. He would build up, but once he'd erupted, he was honestly as happy as Larry. It was literally like a scientific process. He'd unleash on you, the pressure was released, the gas out the can, and he was fine. I mean, he left a trail of shit, and the people he unleashed on weren't fine, but he was. I believe that's nature. Um, but the upbringing and the environment, some of the I'm definitely not alone. I've got 3 kids, I've got a wife, I've got tons of friends, but I feel alone very often. Why? Because I believe my upbringing was one, that made me feel alone. So, that's definitely nurture, in my opinion.
What do you think it would take for you to not feel alone?
God, Martin, you're good at this. Good questions. No wonder you got a podcast. It's a good question. I've actually earlier today I was with my coach. I work with I hate calling them life coach, but business life coach. And they asked me a similar question. They said, what would being happy look like for you? Now, part of that I can't answer because I haven't achieved it, so I'm unsure. Um, but I think it's yeah. I actually can't answer it because I don't recall a time where I didn't feel alone. And as I said, it's not about what I've got. I can walk in my house now. There's four other people there. I've got brother, sister, friends I can call. I'm sure we could have a phone call if one of us felt like that. But
Oh,
yeah, I'm not actually trying to answer. Sorry.
oh, no, no,
Mm.
that's really insightful that you you do struggle to be able to answer that, actually. I'm really fascinated by borderline personality disorder. I was in a relationship with somebody who I thought she may have had borderline personality disorder. Now I believe it may be narcissism, and it wasn't diagnosed, so I'll never know. And it
Yeah.
would be dangerous for me to even poke that there again. But I did do some reading about borderline personality, and I remember trying to address it with this person. And I'd always been warned people with borderline personality are very often in denial and they're very
No,
difficult
we're
to
not.
treat. Hmm?
I
Yeah.
said no, we're not. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Whereas you seem to be acknowledging this. I mean, it's literally inviting on your biography. Is this something which you were able to accept when you were diagnosed, or did you have some resistance to it?
Definitely had some resistance. I think it's mainly the name. I actually think it's a really toxic name. When I got diagnosed, I remember clearly, I remember where I was, I remember the doctor that diagnosed me with it. And at that particular time, I was so unbelievably low, in this place of contemplation of should I live anymore? And someone gives you a phrase of personality disorder,
Yeah, ouch, yeah.
it's like human being disorder. It's like, just so you know, all those feelings you're feeling about not meaning to be, I confirm that's what I diagnose you with. So there was resistance, but more from a place of sadness and just feeling like shit rather than I don't identify.
Right.
Um, when I read the symptoms, for me, it was like, my God, how have I escaped 20 years without being diagnosed, if that makes sense? But I think the main thing for me is the mood, is like the moodiness and the mood swings. Or basically just sort of instability. I can be fine one minute and then not the next. Um, and I do feel my parents always used to refer to me as Jekyll and Hyde, for those that remember. And yeah, I feel that worries me because you don't know which Joey's going to turn up.
Okay. Now, I know that you've got a great job. You seem to have a great career. You've just come back from Dubai, right? Was that personal or for that business?
Personal.
So, again, on a very superficial level, it seems that you're doing great. What don't we see?
Good question. I mean, well, the first thing is define great. Great to you, great to me, great to a listener differs, right?
Sure.
And I remember I once spoke to a friend and we were talking about a salary of 70 grand a year. Now, I'm not in a place to comment on what that means, but as soon as I've said that figure, everyone listening, everyone or you or you will have some association to that figure, whether that's good, bad, or otherwise. So I'm just using that as it's a tangible. But the first thing is, you know, is it because I've got kids and I love my kids, they're beautiful and, being genuine and all the rest of it, because I've got a wife, because I've got a house, because I've got a car or a good job as you perceive it, d- does that mean it's great? So it really is quite an important question. There are many, many athletes who have made it to the top level and are grossly unhappy or,
Sacrifice so much, yeah.
yeah. So I think that's the first thing. But yeah, what you don't see is uh, a lot of the addiction, I can be manic. I don't not be diagnosed with bipolar, but I I can get very moody about things not being in order. So if a house is a mess, I really sort of I attach that to my mind being in a mess, and it builds up and it like chips away at me, and I can lose my shit over, something that just like, come on, the house is just a house. The obsessing about food, the withdrawing as a result of it. If you invite me to your house for dinner and I don't feel comfortable with what you might make for dinner, no reflection on you, I will want to either turn up in jogging bottoms because that's all I feel comfortable in, and it might be inappropriate to do so, or I'll cancel, I'll avoid it. So there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of withdrawal. The main thing that people don't see is, because you can't hear it, is the voice that goes on in my head. Now, we all have that voice. And just to clarify, sometimes when you say voice in your head, some people associate that with being crazy.
Oh, yeah.
But
The
actually,
self-talk, right?
correct. But the clinical diagnosis of insanity is really actually voices outside of your head,
Hmm.
because that leaves you with a warped reality. So again, someone with psychosis may kill someone, which obviously to the outside world is murder and nothing but murder. But to them, they may physically be seen that someone's coming to attack them. So, yeah, the voice inside my head, sorry, I was digressing, it's just so aggressive, punitive, belittling. I can't do any right. So all those things, and I'll just finish on this. Sorry, I've spoken a lot, but all those things that you've mentioned as a benchmark of perceiving to be good, mine is a yes, but yeah, I've got a wife, but you know she doesn't love me, or I was the last person there, or whatever. I don't own this, but I might earn 10 million quid a year, and it's, yeah, well, I don't really deserve that, I fell into the job, or I did this, or I did, there's always a yes but. And it is quite difficult to wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and it's like, oh, you again. And I know that if I wake up tomorrow, it's going to be me again. So you don't hear the voice.
Okay. What fascinates me is, did you say you've got 4 children?
3 children.
3 children, right?
Yeah.
And you're married. You've been married for some time now.
10 years.
Yeah, congratulations. So
Thank you.
there must be something which is going right for your wife to be supporting you. There must be something that that's keeping her patient, willing to work with you. What are the secrets to keeping your relationship healthy?
So I definitely don't feel in a position to be dishing out advice, because I think I'm hard work. See, it's fun. I respect what you're saying. I do. And I respect that on paper, even holding down a job, right? Life's tough. And we're in a crisis with, what's it called? Not the cost of living crisis. Sorry, life's tough, and even the 70 grand these days, as I keep referring to, which I'm not sure if I finished my sentence before, but one of my friends was saying is really, really great income, and one of my other friends was saying no, it's not, and it's just interesting. They had different perceptions of life. To some people, they couldn't dream of earning that. That's incredible, and some people wouldn't get out of bed for that. But
Mhm.
yeah, I guess the pure basis that I've been able to pay my bills means that someone's been paying me, and therefore I must be providing some form of value. And that's what you're saying with my wife as well. The fact that she hasn't walked out on me means somewhere along the line there is a payoff for her. But I'm just recognizing it, that as you say it, the the counter argument in my head is so unbelievably strong of, and I almost don't want to go into it because I don't want to say anything out of line that may not be how my wife feels. But in my mind, it's like, well, she's stuck here. I've been providing for the family. It'd be an upheaval for her to leave, but there's no compassion or agreement of she might actually love me.
Okay. And this is really fascinating. Again, from the outside perspective, if I read your LinkedIn bio, I see your social media postings and things like that, there's a real element of, I'm Joey, I'm doing really well in my life or whatever. And it seems that in your own mind, you don't believe in any of this. Can I ask you a question? What are you good at? What are you proud about?
Um, they're two different questions. So,
Okay,
what I'm proud of is my children,
sure.
and that's a gut. I think when you feel something in your gut, it's natural. You know, as soon as you said what am I proud of, I thought of my three
Yeah,
kids. So I can say hand on heart that is genuine.
sure.
Yeah, what am I good at? I think see, it's like I'm reluctant to say. I'm
I knew you would be.
yeah, and I'm
I
not.
could
Yeah,
see that
that's right.
coming.
It's a good question. And I'm honestly not put just for the audience. This is not putting. You know, this is raw. This is me.
Of
But
course.
I want to say I'm good at public speaking. But yeah, I'm finding it difficult to say. But I do think I'm good at that. I'm gonna go with that. Public speaking.
Awesome. Well done. Well done. I
Thanks.
appreciate the effort it took you to, to be able to come out with that. I could see that kind of fighting with yourself.
Yeah. Oh,
um,
gorgeous.
and yeah, I really do appreciate that. What we were talking about before as well was this facade, which a lot of people put on. And I remember this was again something which upset me about NLP, this act as if, because I did that when I was going through my divorce. I absolutely epitomized this idea. I'm acting as if I acted as if my divorce was a good thing. I acted as if I was happy. And it led to me holding a lot in it. It stopped me asking for help and it stopped people offering me help. And I think from a male perspective, this is a very common thing for men to do. I think society is telling us that we need to be the strong, the leaders. We need to be
Yeah.
strong. And
Hmm.
I think where we both are, the fact that you're getting out public speaking is to just open that dialogue that even the strongest people have got something. Spiritual Healing Cloud is proudly sponsored by my own business, Guided Healing. Join me for profound unscripted hypnosis sessions to explore past lives, connect with your higher self, gain insights and experience physical and emotional healing. Learn more at guidedhealing.ltd.
Yeah. So it's interesting because yeah, I've studied NLP as well, and I've not heard the act as if. So I wonder whether we've done slightly different courses or whether we've perceived things differently. But I call it the masquerade of life,
Nice.
and I think that is so much of life's about that. You know, I find the walk to school in the morning really interesting. You know, or going to work in central London. I really, really love people watching. You know, you got the people which they want to go to Starbucks, they want to walk around with a coffee. You've got people that might have a coffee addiction, so you're perceiving them as wanting to walk around with a coffee. There's so many things I can go into, you know, the way people dress, the tattoos people have, the expressions, you know, it's a masquerade of life. And a lot of people aren't aware, number one. I can tell you that I've really, really tuned into the fact of how many people are blissfully unaware of what's going on for them. Number one. So when we have external perceptions of, well, that person loves themselves, or that person's a dick, or this, that, and the other, I can virtually guarantee you 95% they're completely and utterly unaware.
Yeah.
And the ones that are aware are putting on an act.
Yeah, very true. I remember actually, you were saying about walking to school with the kids. As I was going through my divorce, I was the house husband. I was taking the kids to school, so I was seeing the same parents every day. And I'd been out of the country, living in Thailand for 15 years. I didn't know what it was like to be English. I didn't know the social etiquette here.
Yeah,
And people would say to me, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I didn't realize the answer is no, not bad. It could be worse. Still
yeah,
breathing, all that kind of stuff. So when people ask me, I'd say to them, "Oh, I'm getting divorced." And people were horrified.
yeah.
It's like,
No,
"Oh
they
my
can't wait.
God, you can't answer like that." But then what I noticed was a few days later, people would take me aside and they'd say, "Actually, Martin, me too, me too." And suddenly I was
Brilliant.
opening up to this secret communication, this secret club of people actually going beyond the superficial, and it was quite an eye opener. And I presume you find that when you're speaking, you're going out talking about mental health. Do you get a lot of people coming to you afterwards and say, "This resonates, and I've never shared this with anybody before"?
Yes, but I just want to go back to your story because I actually think that's incredible. And firstly, the phrase "not bad" is such a British staple phrase. And look, I'm not one of those. My work is not to be one of those gurus to be positive. That's not what I'm about. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's to be authentic. But that's an interesting one. I'm not bad. It's what society built on? Is it built on negative connotation that, what if you said, I'm not good, thanks? It's interesting. And the other thing is, and I do it to be an arse, but I find it a good social experiment. Obviously, we've studied NLP, we understand that body language speaks a lot more than words, on the communication model. But to be facetious, when I go into a shop and they stand there at the front and they're like, "Hi, how you doing today?" I go, "Fucking shit, you have a good day." And they're like, you can see them, they're physically, they're like, I don't know what to do with that comment. I just find it interesting because if you actually do pour your life out, again, I'm not saying people aren't caring. It's not from a place of care, but we've all got blinkers on. Martin today was thinking, how can I reconfigure my calendar? I've undone it 2 weeks ago. What have I got going on? I need to do this, that, and the other, and all the things going on in your life. Joey was thinking about, I've got to get through work. I've got to put the kid, I've got my blinkers on. If someone stopped and said, what, I'm really not good. Can I talk to you for 15 minutes? Right at that point, what's your thought process or how do you feel?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah. And I
I
get
tell you
this.
how I feel, and I'm in the world of helping people. This is how I feel. Yeah, okay, come on, let's go.
Yeah, I've got to put my own life. What do they call it on the airplanes? You've got to put your own oxygen on before you can help other people.
Yes, and that's coming from, we're both caring people because I'm not saying others aren't, but you and I have been on a journey. We're sat here, for as much as you're building a podcast, you are having to put yourself listening to me for 90 minutes. It's a big ask. But I guarantee there's an aspect that when someone wants to pour their life out, it's difficult. It's just difficult. It's a lot easier, like you said, to say not bad, not I'm getting divorced. So I think that's an incredible story. Really, I do. And yes, in answer to your question, what it has done, it's enabled me to build deeper relationships a lot more quickly. On the flip side of that, I get so many people in my life and demands to, can I give your number out to this one? Can you help them? Can I speak to you? And it is, what you're saying about the oxygen mask is true because I stand up publicly. I do these podcasts and I tell people, although I've smiled a lot during this podcast, and although I'm trying my best not to be dreary and I'm trying during this podcast not to be my depression, yet because I don't exhibit that body language, people aren't listening to me. I tell them, I stand on stage and say, I feel uncomfortable going out. I feel uncomfortable around people. I don't want to be seen. I hate the way I look. I hate this. I hate that. Yet they're like, can we meet up for a coffee? I need to talk about my life for 5 hours. I'm like, did you not just hear that I said I wanted to kill myself? So yeah, it's amazing because it provides a real beautiful aspect of life. But if you're not careful and don't put your oxygen mask on first, it's very difficult to manage.
Yeah, I remember as I was going through divorce, and again, I'll take responsibility for this, acting as if everything was good. But I told my friends I was getting divorced, and in terms of taking sides, they could all see my perspective because they were my friends first as such. And so many of them, I felt they were being incredibly dismissive. And it wasn't malicious, but I really got a sense that when people don't know how to help, they just don't help. And this came up on a podcast which you were on before. I call these things comfort cliches, and you were talking about this as well. the things people say which mean absolutely nothing. Oh, time heals, or these kind of things, and it's like they're the kind of things people say when they don't know what to say,
Yeah.
and it's kind of to give them the reassurance. Well, I've at least done something without actually doing anything.
I find, obviously, I'm Jewish, and in the Jewish religion, as you well know, this phrase of when someone dies, they say, "Wish you long life,"
Mm.
and I honestly just find it the biggest load of shit. Firstly, when my dad passed away and I was in the depths of despair, I actually didn't want to live a long life, in that
Oh,
moment. And everyone's like, "Wish you long life." I'm like, no, no, wish me a fucking short life. I'm done with this pain. So I found that, and then I just find it's like the dumb thing that society tells you to do in the Jewish religion. But what the fuck does that mean? I wish you a long life. No
yeah,
shit. You wish all of your friends on.
yeah.
Yeah, it drives me mad. But the worst one for me though is at least statements. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
you've been in a car crash, you can no longer walk, you're paralyzed from the waist down. At least you've got your arms. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I do have my
That's where
arms. I can't fucking walk.
reframing gets a little bit too far.
Yeah, exactly.
I like Tony Robbins. He talks about he doesn't believe in positive thinking. He said it's like standing out in the garden and saying, "There's no weeds. There's no weeds in this garden."
Yeah.
Uh, there's weeds. At least it's like the Emperor's New Clothes. At least share it with the world. Tell people there's weeds, and people will start to say, "Yeah, there's weeds in my garden too."
It's true. And I think look, it, I can't sit here and preach that my way of being is the best way because,
I don't think
someone
anyone
could
can.
watch and listen. Yeah, and someone could watch or listen and say, with respect, mate, you're depressed and you got this, that, I get that. Um, but back to what we're talking about, you and I are talking primarily about mental health and specifically in men, because how long have we been on this
I'm
podcast?
not sure
An
actually.
hour and 10 minutes.
I think an hour.
Okay, an
Yeah.
hour. Well, the statistic is globally a man dies from suicide every minute. So you and I have been talking for an hour, and 60 people during this time who are men
Yeah.
globally, as we're doing it right now, have taken their lives. That is a very, very dangerous statistic, and it's true. You and I sat in the comfort of our own homes, and 60 men have chosen to take their lives. The point I'm making is these statements of being positive, I think, just discourages bringing out what's going on, you know,
Yes.
and talking about it and bringing it to the surface and man up and you're crying like a girl and pull yourself together. You're not always capable of doing that. So, is that a fair expectation?
Very true. My mission, and I've been trying to articulate it recently, is I want to encourage more men to be authentic and to be vulnerable. Now, there's two sides to this. I mean, I'm seeing this beautiful world where everybody's doing it. But if only some people are doing it and other people aren't, I think it could be very uncomfortable. I think it can lead to exploitation. It can lead to a lot of hurt. Do you think it's beneficial for men to embrace their vulnerability?
100%. And look, as I go back to everything, life's about perception and how you view things. And some people will see it as a weakness, and some people will actually see it as a strength. But look, my experience, much like yours, you've been in some very difficult places and places that even when you talk and I listened to your voice note you sent me, and if I had the time, I'd want to listen for 2 or 3 hours. Honestly, I'm fascinated. I want to understand all the aspects of what it's like to be inside. It really is one of those gripping things that we all fear. You've actually done it. And same with me, I unfortunately have been in places and circumstances, or fortunately, that I am beyond talking about superficial stuff. It doesn't interest me.
Mm.
I'm lost. It's not my love language. And you and I probably connect because I suspect you're wired in a similar way, or learned to be in a similar way through
Mm.
life experiences. So yeah, I think vulnerability adds a layer of authenticity. And I think if your goal is to be the joker of the pack, have 1,000 friends, be liked by everyone, then I don't think vulnerability is going to work for you. I think if you're happy to be true to yourself, um, I think vulnerability is a beautiful gift.
I think it's a very brave thing for people to do. When I came out of prison, I wanted to tell people about it. And it was my relatives who discouraged me. And they were the ones saying, you can't talk about this. There's so much stigma involved with it that it's best to just be quiet. The police who came to follow up with me, just get on with your life. Don't tell anyone about it. Stay out of trouble and it will be fine. And there was a level of indignation with that. It's like, but I didn't do anything wrong. This is just the police trying to cover their own back. This is my parents worrying about people doubting my honesty. And I thought life is too short for that. And what I have found is it's the most perfect filter. People I meet now, the difference between being an acquaintance and being a friend is when I've shared my story. And with one exception, I remember a Tinder date that I met this lady for the first time, and we'd gone for this walk together. We were alone walking through the hills of a beautiful part of the country. And I mentioned I'd just come out of prison and it
Gone.
didn't go down very well. She couldn't
Yeah.
wait to get back home. But beyond that, everybody else has been, wow, I just want to give you a hug. And I can honestly say it was only going through so much hardship, talking about it, that I've actually learned what true friendship is.
Well,
Everything else before that, yeah, was
so
superficial.
look, again, it's not for everyone, and everyone, at the end of the day, everyone and all of us, we have to do what's right for us, and only we know that. So, and I say this in my talks, I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to say, please do this, please do that. There isn't a right way. There's a million different ways to skin a cat, as they say. But for me personally, this is my not higher power, but this is my higher value in life. Again, you mentioned earlier, I don't know whether it was pre or when we started post recording, but you mentioned about me giving back. Um, I've decided that gives me something else to live for. It gives me a legacy. And I respect not everyone wants to listen, not everyone's in that zone, not everyone agrees with it. Some people think it's embellished, whatever they think, that's okay. But I I have been through a certain experience which I've found and continue to find very, very challenging. Now, for me, I decided to go through a process of coming out. And although I'm not referring to homosexuality, it honestly did feel like that. It was a big
Of course.
thing that I hid. And again, I'm absolutely sure that you went through and go through that as well. You don't quite necessarily always know the time to say it or how much detail to go onto or into or what questions people are going to ask. And I'd say one of the biggest steps has been putting it on LinkedIn specifically because LinkedIn is deemed more of a professional, uh, social media outlet. And I'll just say one last thing. I started putting it on LinkedIn. I put it on Instagram a lot and other places, but not LinkedIn. And when I started putting it on LinkedIn, about 2 weeks later, a friend messages me and he says, we've both got a mutual contact. I won't mention them by name. And they're a client of yours. And they've actually phoned me saying they're doubting your credibility to do the job now that you've put all this stuff out on there. And my friend said, I think if you want to keep them, you better stop posting. I said, absolutely not. Um,
Well done.
Now, it's not to be difficult or confrontational. I respect that said individual who's doubting me, they haven't been exposed to that. They've been brought up in a way of macho. This individual is very sort of macho, male chauvinistic. You don't show weaknesses, and I fully respect that. So I respect that when you're reading all that stuff, what effect it might have on you. But for me, I'm not going to stop being authentic, and I'm not going to stop putting it out there. And like you said, you learn who your friends are. If that person doesn't want to do business with me because I'm being vulnerable, then they're not the right client for me.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I think that's a beautiful thing to be sharing. Do you find that you still have to wear two different hats as such? The vulnerable Joey on the director of a company Joey, or have you been able to shed that?
Definitely. definitely still have my cloak and my masquerade on. Um, and I find it even more interesting because it's so out there. How many people don't ask, or because you're in the public sector, sorry, not public sector, in the public domain and putting it out there, it's as if you don't suffer with it anymore. Because
Mm,
it's my story is not I've overcome it and buy my book and I'll teach you in 7 days how to get rid of depression. That's not what I'm selling here. What I'm selling is authenticity and trying to open people's eyes that if you think someone has is rude because they've cancelled 10 plans in a row with you, they might be rude, of course, but there might be something else going on, and that is my goal. And yeah, I every day I'm putting on one now. We all are.
of course, yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to at times, unfortunately.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. I'd like to ask as well is where would you like to take this? Do you see speaking about mental health as something which would eventually perhaps take over from your professional career? Or do you think you'll always be doing them side by side?
Um, Look, I need to earn a living.
Mm,
So with the caveat of I will always do something to enable me to pay my bills because I have to.
yeah.
But in terms of my passion, I feel I've got something to give, and what I like about my talk. So there you go. I'm gonna try and pay myself a compliment here. Is I'm just talking about my experience. I'm not trying to indoctrinate. I'm not trying to, you know, push people to say, look, get up at 5, do an ice bath at 5 past 5, make your protein shake. That's not what I'm about. I'm just trying to be real and to explain that honestly, it's just things aren't what they seem, and you don't know what's going on. So where would I like to be? Look, I would like to be on the biggest stage possible. I would like to do TED Talks. I would like to be, an award-winning author. It's not to win the awards per se, so I can say I'm award winning. It's so I know if I'm award winning, the assumption is that my book has probably gone further than just my family reading it, and therefore I've helped more people. But it doesn't come without fear, and I worry a lot about what message people hear. I worry about if there's someone in dire straits, if I say the wrong thing and they go and take their life. It's full of anxiety and imposter syndrome. Why would you? I'm just some guy that lives in North London. Who am I? So yeah, it's not without its worry, but I think for me, a big goal will be a TEDx talk. Um,
Me too. I will see you there.
yeah,
I'll save
uh,
you a seat.
lovely. Thank you.
um, that's interesting. I was interviewed myself on a podcast a few weeks ago, and we were talking again about men's mental health. And I was thinking, well, what what message could we share with the world? And the one thing I would like to encourage more men to do is to open up. When I was going through divorce, because I'd relocated from Thailand, and I'd done everything to kind of keep the family together. I didn't have any friends I could talk to. I was going through levels of domestic abuse at the time, which I wasn't aware of because I didn't have any male friends to chat to, perhaps in the pub, who would have said, "Hey, Martin, this isn't right.
Mm.
This isn't this isn't normal for people." So I personally believe that it would really benefit a lot of men to get involved with talking to other men, either socially or as part of men's mental health groups. I know one just opened up recently near me, and this isn't for mental health in particular, it's just as an outlet for men to go and talk about what they want to talk about. What kind of things do you think would be beneficial to men going through the kind of, depression, anxiety which you've gone through?
Um, Men's mental health group, and like you said, it's not just you've got to suffer from depression to go. It's just a safe space with people sharing similar feelings. I think the challenge with that is if you see, if you're, for example, this client that I described, and you're not used to opening up and you see an advert for something like that, the challenge is how do you get someone there that isn't naturally inclined to do that. I think, yeah, listen, being exposed like in the workplace to talk. So I'm not just saying it to plug myself and what I do, but my talk. I often get asked, for example, what's the outcome we can expect? Like, for example, with our sales team, I'm not going to increase sales by 10% doing my talk. I'm not a sales coach. The outcome one can expect is an environment where people feel happier to and supported to talk, because I go in there and I really slate myself in front. I overly slate myself in front of people. It's not to seek sympathy, it's to lay the pathway for, regardless of what anyone's thinking of me. And judging by some of the things you've said on this call, and I'm going to make a very big judgment here, there's something that I've got, whatever that is, that you or other people might want. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be the family, it could be the gym, whatever. It could be my hair, my bracelet, who knows.
I can tell you exactly what it is. It's the authenticity. How many people are brave enough to get themselves up and share these type of things? Because I think many of us are thinking it, but it's another level to be brave enough to get it out there with perhaps the hope that it resonates with somebody. Because it will, absolutely.
But you have that in abundance. So for the
I'm
podcast, yeah, but you,
taking a lot of inspiration from you with that, but I also recognize that these compliments are going to fall flat with you, aren't they? I could I could butter
yeah.
you up for the rest of the evening and you'll still go back wondering if I was just talking nonsense. Right?
No, of course, but I think genuinely, to flip it back, you've mentioned a number of traumatic experiences on this podcast, and for those watching you've taken it on yourself to. I've always seen you as a go-getter, someone that is resourceful, and you'll jump into a career and do it to your best ability. And for those watching, hasn't come without its challenges. For someone to sit openly, the stigma attached to the word prison,
Yeah.
is humongous. But not everyone in prison is bad. Not everyone in, and who, I cut. This is the thing: you can't pass judgment. And when you're sat in a mental health hospital, and I'll tell you one very, very quick story, if I may. I use it in my public speaking a lot, and I'm going to give you a very abridged version, but in the Priory Hospital, it's basically like a country hotel type vibe. Um, so it's got long, windy roads, and there's like a manor house at the end. And the roads have the speed bumps, and they say 5 miles an hour. It's a quiet, that type of vibe. And I was there. I don't smoke, but I was there with the smokers just on the lunch break. And there's a car which is literally, it's so loud, it's zooming, and you turn around, and it was a Ferrari, and it was flying over these bumps. And instantly you're thinking, who the fuck is that? You're sat here in a very dark place in a mental health institution, and someone's got the balls or audacity or whatever you want to call it to drive their Ferrari at silly speeds. Anyway, they get out and they're wearing a very, very tight t-shirt, muscles bulging in so many places that even their cheeks were ripped. And I'm there in there for eating problems and body image and all that stuff, and I'm just shriveling up into well, this person has money, they've got the physique, they're smashing life. After the lunch break finished, they went in and I never saw them. I just didn't see them. And after the lunch break, I'm sitting in group therapy and it's just about to start. There's one seat left, and this guy walks in. I'm thinking, oh God, this is the therapist. So now I'm going to spend my session obsessing about how amazing the therapist is. And it wasn't. It was a patient, and he sat down, itching to speak, and he literally was like, me. And he said with tears in his eyes, he's like, the first thing that came out in the session was, I hate myself and I want to die. And listen, we know that things aren't what they seem. You and I have spoken about the masquerade of life. Yeah, it's a throwaway statement to most people. I was in prison. After you finish talking with them in that conversation, they get on with their day. But you were the one that sat there day in, day out, experienced what you experienced. You know what it's like to be inside. The lack of cleanliness, being stuck in a room with someone you don't want to be, all the other things, that everything attached to that. And I attached to this guy. He's fucking amazing because he looked great. He's muscular. He had the blah 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 blah, and he got in and he honestly said, "I want to kill myself." So yeah,
That
things aren't
really
what they.
resonates. Actually, there's a couple of things I want to mention as well. You
Yeah.
remind me of a massive fight I got involved with probation services when I came out of prison. I wanted to write to all the friends who I made in prison. And they could not get their head around that. Why on earth would you want to be in touch with people in prison? I'm like, because they were the most authentic people I have ever met. Because when you're in prison, there's nothing to hide.
Yeah.
It's pretty much there. If they don't tell you what they're in for, somebody else will. Somebody will have Googled them or whatever. They would have called up their relatives to say, what's the gossip on this person? So it's all there. And that was where I learned authenticity. I mean, there were certainly people who I know that they were lying when I came out, but a lot of the people, I'm not in touch with them. And in fact, it was one of my friend's birthdays today. This was a guy who was a drug courier for the Hells Angels. And he was a really tough guy. He came out and he took his probation officer prisoner, hostage. So he's been sentenced to 2 life sentences for that. And he was the nicest guy I have ever known. He bent over backwards to do everything he could for me and my padmate. He cooked for us. He grew tomatoes so that he could make us food. It was absolutely amazing. And I was so irritated with probation saying, why would you want to be in contact with people like that?
So, question for you: do you regret being in prison?
I didn't have any choice. I did have a choice. I had a choice of maintaining my innocence or changing my plea, because I'd always maintained my innocence all the way through, including to the sentencing. And it was made very apparent to me by a probation officer who interviewed me before the sentencing. She said to me, I'm going to recommend you have a suspended sentence and you could be out in the next few weeks. The only thing going against you, and in my mind, it's maintaining my innocence. The legal system sees that as lack of remorse. Okay, and it's a horrible thing to be thrown at me. It's like, well, there's no other solution there. So it was my decision. I thought I'm going to stay honest. I'm going to stay true to myself. I had the optimistic assumption that I'd be able to appeal and it would all sort itself out. But even then, I knew that I wouldn't get to see my kids for the year, and I've got to take some responsibility for making that decision. I learned a hell of a lot. I've come out a very different person. I used to be very entrepreneurial. I used to fight my way through everything which was thrown at me until I got to a point where I just couldn't fight anymore. And that was my big, it sounds pompous to say the spiritual awakening, but a spiritual awakening is when you hit the lowest point of your life and you realize that it's all just a pantomime. We're all playing by rules which we don't have any control over until we stop and question them all. But that's one for another episode for sure.
But do you feel? But do you? Sorry, I keep interrupting. I'm just not. Do you regret it? As in, you actively chose to go to. I know there was a setup there or whatever. But do you look at it as fuck? Look what happened to me, and it's ruined my life, or the opposite?
I could. It's so easy to just live as a victim. That is far more convenient to get through in society as a victim. Okay, you say, "Oh, I was abused, I was wrongfully imprisoned," all of this, and you'll find your support groups, which don't really heal, but they pat each other on the back and give people significance. It's about taking responsibility. It's not even what's right, what is wrong. I mean, I've gone through that stage of being incredibly indignant, incredibly angry, but then there has to ultimately be a case of, well, I'm living this life. I've got to take some responsibility for that. And I am so grateful for the way I've been able to see the world differently as a result of that.
That's really important.
Yeah, but I don't feel like I had a choice with that. That said, there are people who come out of prison incredibly bitter and they never move forward. This isn't an NLP concept, but I wish it was. We have like the 10 tenets of NLP. I want to slide one in. It's like, how can I make the most of that? And I'd like to think I am, and I certainly see that in you. It's like, of all the shit you've had to work through, how can you make the most of that? And that is get it out so that somebody else will say, oh, I'm not alone. This is somebody else is doing this. Maybe there is support there. Maybe there is another person to talk to.
Fascinating. Yeah. I
The
agree.
other thing as well, you were talking about the guy, the guy at the Priory. That very much mirrors where I was just after my divorce. Literally, like um, within a month of having to leave the family house. I lost the divorce in a very horrific way. I had to be out. So I went to a men's coaching workshop in London. And it was a 4-day workshop. And I remember walking in on day one. I think there was 400 men. And I looked around and I thought, oh my God, everybody here is so much better than me. I lose phrase. But everyone was better dressed, clearly looked like they were more successful. They were taller than me. They were more confident than me. And they were driving cars. I wasn't even driving at the time. And it was really fascinating that over the 4 days, when every one of those 400 people got a chance to share things with the group, I came out thinking, wow, I am so grateful for what I've got. Because no matter how bad things can be, other people have got it worse. But it got me seeing the world very differently as well. There's something which I was interviewed once, and I came out with a phrase, and I'm very proud of it, but nobody's quoted me on it, so I'm hoping this sticks. It's everybody is fucked up. Some people are just better at hiding it than others.
It's true. And I think it was interesting at the start of the podcast, I was feeling like the conversation was driving towards, but if I've got all this stuff, how can I still feel like this? And that's exactly what we're saying here, that, I don't have a Ferrari, but the things you've mentioned to other people might be a Ferrari, having kids or what. I can't think, I'm not trying to put something in someone's mind, but whatever that is that they think I've got, it's not, it's almost completely irrelevant. It's, what state is your mind in? If you don't have your mind, you don't have anything, in my opinion. And are you able, it's okay to have those thoughts. We can't stop negative thoughts. When that's like you said with Tony Robbins, if for me, a prime example is road rage. Quite often you want to absolutely slaughter the person, but there's a difference between thinking it and doing it. It is okay to think that. Sometimes we have inappropriate thoughts, but yeah, I could have 10 kids. I could be, dancing the funky chicken on my 75th wedding anniversary, as they say in the sunscreen song. I could be a billionaire. It doesn't matter. It's how you relate to it, and that's what's pertinent about your phrase.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for the validation with that as well. Let's wrap things up. Obviously, you're a public speaker and a mental health coach. I'm certain that the people listening to this would be interested in knowing a bit more about how perhaps they could work with you. I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit. Any closing words?
Really just a mantra that I like to live by. And I recently got it tattooed on me, so that's how strongly I feel about it. But it's an old tale of an old Cherokee. And I think it's the grandson or the son or whatever it is, says to the old Cherokee, his grandfather, he says, I don't understand. I've got two wolves inside of me. One is fear, anger, jealousy, hatred, petulance, and one is happiness, joy, serenity, peace, kindness, and they're fighting. And he says to the Cherokee, how do I know which one wins the fight? And the Cherokee goes, well, it depends which one you feed. And I love that.
Yeah.
I really love it. So yeah, I'm going to leave you with that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Really appreciated speaking with you.
And you, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you liked this episode. To learn more, please visit our website at spiritualhealing.cloud and be sure to give us feedback and spread the word.